Support for the Blueprint podcast comes from the SANS Institute. Are you a new Blue Team member or SOC analyst looking to make sense of the vast variety of data that you see on a day-to-day basis? Are you working in a SOC that's plagued with alerts that are constantly bothering you with false positives or repetitive action? If so, I know that pain. I remember being an analyst and walking into the SOC and thinking everything was going to be great and then realizing, oh, we have some serious problems here. I've dealt with those problems over the course of my long career, and the results of what I've learned have been summarized in my brand new course, SEC 450 Blue Team Fundamentals. If you're a new SOC analyst looking to get a grapple on all of the network and host data that you interact with, improve your analysis technique, learn how to reverse engineer malicious file types that you commonly see in phishing or downloaded from the internet, or just get rid of those pain points from the average SOC, like repetitive actions, drowning in tickets, alert fatigue, SEC 450 is the class for you. Check this course out at sansurl.com/450. Hope to see you in class.
This is a Blueprint broadcast bringing you the latest in cyber defense and security operations from top Blue Team leaders. Blueprint is brought to you by the SANS Institute and is hosted by SANS certified instructor John Hubbard. And now, here's your host, John Hubbard.
In this episode of Blueprint, we have none other than security guru Anton Chuvakin. Anton is an industry veteran who has watched security trends come and go over many years and is always providing lots of insightful and forward-looking industry analysis. In this episode, we talk about current and future security operations technology, which tools are the most important and which are becoming less important over time, the role of automation in the SOC, and how Anton would set up a modern security operations center for a cloud-native organization. All that and more today on the Blueprint Podcast. All right, welcome everyone to the Blueprint Podcast. Today we've got a guest that ever since we started Blueprint, I knew we'd have to try to get on one day. So today is finally that day. Someone who's been in the security space for a long time, seen it all, and always sharing his incredible insight. And that person is Dr. Anton Chuvakin. So welcome to the podcast.
Perfect. Thanks for inviting me. Finally. Thanks for finally inviting me.
So if we could, let's start off giving the listeners a little bit about your background and what you're doing now.
So I guess my probably biggest claim to fame is being a Gartner analyst for about 8 years and then being lured back into the vendor land. I was a consultant. I worked for a few vendors. And again, as I said, I was an analyst. But pretty much throughout my career, I was writing stuff. I was kind of writing things from, tweets to books, mostly on the area around security operations. Funny enough, I also wrote a book on PCI compliance. But please don't hold it against me. I also now run a bit of a new podcast on cloud security, which is my current love child, so to say.
Awesome. Thank you. So there's a ton of topics we could certainly cover here, and I'm going to hope to try to get to as many of them as we can within the hour we have. First off, I want to start, obviously, your specialty being security operations and where we've been in the past and kind of where we're going in the future. I know you're involved in a lot of the newer technologies. I'd like to start off asking, the traditional architecture that many organizations probably still have in large part, firewalls, IDSs, AV, and all that kind of stuff that's been around for a long, long time. Where do you see the role of those types of things in the future? Are we still using them? Are they still good? Are we replacing them? More important, less important? Where are we standing at with that?
So I'm going to start from the point that was kind of my main learning after 8 years as an analyst. To me, this is going to be a surprise for many people. But after I left Gartner, I kind of thought, what is my main learning after being 8 years as an analyst? And I realized that my main learning, and there's only one, is that IT inertia is really strong. And that things that you'd assume should be dead by 2005 are alive in 2020. Sometimes people would call with questions that I would call time machine questions. The questions that I would expect to hear if it were 1998, but I heard them in 2018. So with this possibly excessively long preface, I would say that I fear that a lot of the stuff we're discussing as legacy technologies would be with us for a long time. I don't know how long. I don't know exactly whether the current accelerated transformation of IT would change things. Frankly, at this point, I'm ready to bet on the inertia.
Yeah, I think I would agree.
I'm going to bet on the inertia. So if you have a question about patching Windows and it's 1998, it's a perfectly reasonable question. If it's 2005, it's still a reasonable question. 2010, reasonable question. 2020, you know what? It's still a reasonable question. So let's go back to 2025. Will how to patch Windows right be a reasonable question?
Seeming like yes.
So that's my meta answer to your question about this stuff that you described. Funny enough, I was trying to describe to somebody how technologies would deal with threats evolve, and I said, have we retired any security technologies for good, or have we fixed any threats for good? And of course, people would always bring up funnies like, well, a data loss by stealing a typewriter ribbon is gone. And then you have to explain that, physical typewriters, they print, there's this ribbon, and you can read stuff from it. But this is all from the domain of humor. What are realistic digital threats that are just completely gone? They're gone. They're fixed. I cannot name one. I really couldn't. And I dare the listeners to name one threat we truly fixed.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I hadn't thought about it like that before. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to get some of this stuff away. And I'm sure some of that's the inertia, and some of that is just the way we're doing it, it doesn't really change. And we can't have perfect security on a lot of these kind of human interactive kind of threats, phishing and that kind of stuff. We're always going to have the human angle, right? Where you can trick people, and it's really hard to back that up. With the shift and the rapid shift now, of course, of everyone to the cloud, those traditional tools, there's some efforts to get those same things deployed in cloud forward kind of environments and all of that. But there's also this whole new breed of tools that's kind of coming online to cater to the organization that started there, or at least has largely jumped fully into, I guess, what we would call a quote unquote modern architecture, right? Mm-hmm. What do you see the effect of shifting to the cloud very rapidly is on these traditional tools, and are they working in that environment, do you think?
So here's the funny one. I kind of spent my morning today recording a podcast on this very topic. And the interesting bit is not to promote the podcast, but to make the point that the challenge, I've distilled the challenge to one point. And the challenge is that a lot of people travel to the cloud with the mental models and operational models that are built on-prem. And sometimes you can go and grab the security leader who does this by the button and kind of try to shame them and say, dude, why are you doing this? This is not a data center. This has microservices. This has containers. This has APIs. This is a cloud. It's different. Why are you doing it? And sometimes my epiphany came to me when one of the people I've cornered like that told me, we are following the on-prem blueprint because this is the only one we know. And then, as they say in Buddhist literature, I got enlightened. It's not about them being wrong or stupid or anything. It's kind of the only track they know. And so trying to get traditional organizations to become cloud native in security or in general, but we're talking security here, turning out to be really difficult because they learned in data centers. They learned on premise. They learned with firewalls. They learned with DMZs. They learned with SOCs with lots of chairs. They learned with traditional SIEM and the practices that go with that. So to me, sometimes the main challenge is not, hey, did you know there's an API security gateway? Or, hey, have you heard of CASB? Have you heard of some other interesting modern security technology for the cloud? Gartner, my former employer, made a lot of acronyms, CWPP, CASB, CSPM. At this point, I may not even know some of them. The thing is that these are cloud native tools for people who are sort of mostly changed their thinking already. But if your thinking is in firewalls and SIEM and more traditional environment, tools won't really fix it for you. Maybe I'm rambling a little bit, but it's been really on my mind lately that the shift sometimes is not about which tools do I change or which operational practices I change. It's kind of the level above that. How do I start thinking, I'm in the cloud, things are different. I may not need a virtual copy of my firewall appliance. I may not need the on-premise log collector or other things. So to me, this is hard, and this is not easy, and this is kind of a culture change, thinking change challenge, which is occasionally harder than just tool replacements.
Yeah, that's actually exactly where I was hoping you'd go with that. Have you found a good way to help organizations learn and kind of absorb the new way of thinking and become enlightened, as you said?
So if it were my analyst years and somebody would call me and say, I'm going to shift to the cloud and I'm going to do the naive lift and shift. I'm just going to copy, turn my systems into VMs and shove the VMs in the cloud provider. And I'm going to copy most of my security infrastructure. I may be dying inside when I hear this, but my response to them would be, okay, let's think about the trade-offs. Let's think about the pluses and minuses. You are sticking to familiar tools. You have people who know these tools. You have people who know the systems. You build certain processes over the past decade or 2 decades, and I can see the temptation to stick to the familiar because you know it. However, let's just try to see what the balance is. Like, you're going to be sticking to the familiar, but you're going to be losing some advantages of going to cloud the cloudy way, and you may be okay with that. So let's just see how your transition would look like. So I wouldn't just freak out and say, no, don't do that. You should do cloud native. You should do microservices. You should do this. I would say, okay, so let's think of a transition. Let's think of a trade-offs. Let's make them explicit. I want to copy my firewall appliance to the cloud. Okay, you can call the vendor and they would give you a virtual appliance that would run in big 3 cloud providers. You can do that. You can structure the DMZ the same way you do on-prem. However, if you do this, you're going to lose this. And on balance, sometimes it would reduce the motivation to go to the cloud. It would either be cost prohibitive, very often, or it would be kind of agility restricting. And if we all know that cloud movements, cloud migrations are because cost or agility or a bunch of other reasons, what if you are killing those reasons with your approach? Then wait a second, whoa. Now I need to think a bit harder. So to me, this is how I solve it. I don't freak out and say, don't do that. I kind of think, let's build a plan where we check some of the things that are old, check some of the things that are new, and sort of grow the percentage of new to be higher over time.
That's a good rational approach. Say all or nothing, right? That's one of the things we're always preaching is like, better is better, but also once you get a little bit better, continue down the path and try to prioritize. And, even if you can't go all new style cloud thinking right away, like at least you've got stuff to the cloud and you can slowly start to morph it over time. One of the things you had mentioned was, SOC and SIM and some of the traditional tools that have been used in the past for this sort of thing. What's your feeling on, SIM especially is one of the things you've written a lot about. What do you think the role of that kind of tool is in a new kind of cloud architecture, right? We still have logs, we still have all that stuff. Is it staying around, or are we getting better options? Where's that going?
So let me kind of split the SIM as a sort of technology envisioned around 2005 and then evolved since the time, and the need to analyze logs. So to me, you may like SIM, you may dislike SIM. I've met a fair bit of people who are burned by SIM so badly they hate it. They think it should die. Some of them think that it has died. The point is that they may be true, they may not be true, but we will need to analyze logs. And to me, we're going to need to analyze logs more, not less. One of the very useful objects, sort of artifacts I've built in my Gartner days was a triad of visibility, where I kind of said, to have good security, visibility, detection, response, you need to look at logs. You need to look at endpoint data, such as using EDR, and you need to look at traffic, such as using what we now call NDR or traffic analysis. And the point is that if you go heavy cloud native, you would sometimes lose traffic analysis, or you have to jump through hoops to get it back. And if you lose the infrastructure as a service and you lose the systems, you lose the OS, you also kind of lose the EDR. And if you look at the triad of visibility, what remains? It's the logs. So the need to do log analysis would go up, not down. Now, are you using a traditional SIM for that? Separate story. But I'm going to remain a staunch defender of log analysis. And sometimes a few weeks ago, somebody said, "Oh, Anton, you wrote a book on SIM." And I'm like, no. I wrote the book on log analysis. I did not write a book on SIM. I don't want to write a book on SIM. I may like the technology, but the label is more passing. The log analysis is forever. Sorry, this is kind of too glamorous at this point. So to get back to the original question is, I would say that we will still need to analyze logs and probably to do more of that, and logs from new things. Again, some stuff from what is now called with a trendy observability word, which is logs from inside the applications. The endpoint would be with us for some time. We'll still have other things. We'll have logs from API access, from gateways, from CASB, from all sorts of cloud native constructs. And there would be a need to combine them and analyze them. And to me, it sounds like SIM, right? Whether it would be a software as a service SIEM or some kind of evolved technology that isn't even called SIEM, separate story. But to me, log analysis would stay and it would grow in importance, not decrease in importance.
Yeah, I like that you brought up the EDR, the network endpoint and kind of log angle of it. That's one of those things that I'm always trying to find the right balance of, right? And one of the things that's obviously happening more currently is encryption standards, TLS 1.3 and DOH and all of that are making network analysis way harder, or at least requiring decryption, which a lot of people don't have, and all that kind of stuff. And with that, seeing a lot of people kind of leaning more towards endpoint because, you can kind of see everything on the endpoint. And then we have the emergence of, this new XDR category, right? Well, I'm curious to know what you would suggest for organizations when they need to move in the direction of getting an EDR or an XDR, and maybe what XDR is for those that hadn't run into that before. Because I have a lot of people asking like, I have a SIEM. Do I need an EDR? I have a SIEM. Do I need XDR? When do I know that I need a new technology for this?
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you're enjoying this episode, then you're undoubtedly interested in building the strongest security operations team that you can. For those who want to go even deeper, did you know that SANS has not one, but 2 courses that cover security operations centers as well? For the leaders, managers, and directors out there, my co-author Mark Orlando and I offer 551, Building and Leading Security Operations Centers. This course covers building your team, your physical and virtual workspace, getting the right data into your tools, and then focusing on security priorities through everyday execution of important security tasks and building the best SOC team possible. For the technical practitioners out there, my course Sec 450, Blue Team Fundamentals, Security Operations and Analysis is designed to cover everything you need to jump in being the best SOC analyst that you can be. We cover important data types, SOC tools, security logs, malware, analysis technique, automation, and much, much more. In addition, if you want to prove you can deliver the best on any security team, both courses have an accompanying certification available from GIAC. That's the GSOM for 551 and the GSOC for 450. Check out both courses and free demos available on the SANS website. You can get registered today for an in-person course at one of our many events, or go to On Demand and take either class anywhere at your own pace. Thanks for listening.
Let me kind of split it into 2 questions. I would deal with the modern, or my take on kind of rebalancing of the 3 sides of a triangle, and then I'll deal with XDR a little bit later. So I would say that my impression is that you're absolutely correct about the relative loss of the network visibility. Now, there are ways to kind of get it back sometimes. There are examples where it still plays a huge role. I have friends at Corelight and other good vendors that do network traffic analysis or network detection and response. And they remain relevant, but I would say that you're right. It's kind of a battle because of encryption, because of bandwidth, because of architectures, because of work from home, because of decentralized nature of organizations, like long list. So which kind of pushes the SIEM/log analysis in EDR a little bit higher. Now, a few years ago, I've met somebody who said that their SOC is largely EDR-based and SIEM is an auxiliary, a log analysis is auxiliary. My initial reaction is, of course, to get angry and say, dude, you're doing it wrong. You should really get SIEM first and EDR later. But I've met more organizations who went with EDR first, and kind of EDR is their primary tool. That's the tool they look at every day, sometimes every hour, and they do look at logs, but less. And later, I kind of accepted that this is a reasonable approach today. Now, in the early days of EDR, people would hear that EDR is an agent, and they would freak out and they want to run for the hills. They just don't want the conversation to continue because agents. SIEM sounded like a good idea by comparison. Today, I do see a lot fewer people freak out because EDR is an agent, and a lot more people appreciate or realize the complexities of doing effective log analysis at scale. So I would say today, if somebody from a mid-maturity, mainstream organization comes to me, I would say EDR would probably be playing a big role, if not the central role in your SOC. You're going to have some kind of a modern cloud-managed EDR. It scales well, it detects threats, it allows you to investigate. And of course, you'd still do log analysis and SIEM, and it's kind of your call as to whether you'd have SIEM first, EDR second, or EDR first, SIEM second. That still would be my plan. And I've stopped being offended for people who say, I'm going to do EDR as my main monitoring, detection, and response system, and SIEM would be an auxiliary. I'm okay with that now, and I think I see the reasons why. There's a blog post where I say something like a practical path to XDR or something, where I say that people choose EDR because the signal is just much cleaner than a typical SIM signal, at least without much tuning. So people say, okay, I'm going to take some damage on the agent side. I'm going to do agents, but I will have cleaner detection and investigation telemetry because EDR makes it. I don't have to live with imperfect logs. That's why I'm choosing this. So now to your second part. To me, as a former Gartner analyst, we were supposed to kind of hate XDR by charter because guess what? Forrester made it up. Later on, things change, and now both major analyst firms actually write about XDR. To me, my second challenge with the term was that it's so fuzzy that it's not really clear what it means. And then my third challenge with that is that with some definitions of XDR that I've seen, it sounds exactly like SIM, which made me kind of a little angry and a little upset at the same time because I'm like, what are you doing here? Like you're defining some kind of technology that collects and analyzes logs and other telemetry, and what do you call it? Oh, XDR? Wait a second, that's called SIM.
That's exactly my reaction.
Yeah. So I kind of had to craft or maybe align my thinking with some kind of a crisp XDR definition, which I like. And I have a blog post somewhere where I kind of say that to me, XDR is this type of a EDR-centric monitoring paradigm, a monitoring approach, where I use an EDR and I kind of extend out from EDR. So to me, XDR is extended EDR. So we shouldn't call it XEDR, but it's ultimately an EDR that became a little bit bigger and its mission broadened. Maybe it's an EDR that can do a little bit of log analysis. Maybe it's EDR that can do some other functions. But to me, practicing XDR is kind of starting with EDR and focusing on the endpoint telemetry that the agent makes for detection and response, and then doing other things. So to me, this is kind of the alternative monitoring vision to a SIM-centric vision. I can do SIM, I can get all the logs together, try to correlate them, try to make sense of them, and then use other technologies. And that would be the SIM route. The other route is, okay, I'm going to deploy agents, I'm going to do EDR, and then I'm going to extend from EDR to other things. That's how I kind of come to peace with XDR as a vision. I see it as kind of an alternative to SIM vision for the detection and response tooling. Hopefully I didn't confuse too many people, but at least it's clear in my head. I need to find that blog post and share the link.
Yeah, definitely. We can put that in the show notes. So if you were building a SOC right now in terms of, you had budget, medium-sized organization, whatever, you could get SIM and EDR, XDR, what would the tool set be that you would construct? What are the primary things you would go for?
First thing is, if I am really mid-sized or restricted in the budget, I'll probably try to rely on managed services to an extent. Like this has been, I had a funny challenge with an analyst. I wanted to write a paper focused on how to start detection and response capability for a new company. And I was really passionate about writing it. And lots of people told me, wait a second, you already wrote a paper how to use an MSSP. Why do you want to start a paper on detection and response for beginners? Because beginners shouldn't do it. Beginners should just use MSSP. And I said, wait a second, no. There are other situations where simply saying, just call up the big or small MSSP and MDR and just go to them. It's not really the approach people would take. So I did write the paper. It still is in Gartner, on Gartner side. But the point is that I kind of try to build a technology stack and have one eye out on which tasks I would outsource / delegate. So probably it's going to be a hybrid model where some of the personnel is mine, but some of the personnel is third party. It's going to be some kind of MSSP MDR. As far as tool set, if I am a more traditional company, not cloud native, I would still say some form of SIM or log analysis, some form of EDR, preferably cloud managed, and then some form of visibility for the cloud, likely CASB. The challenge with the software as a service side, SaaS, is that you have no place to put agents, right? But you do need to see what's going on there. So today, the primary vehicle for that is either native logs from SaaS services going into SIM, which is, kind of friction heavy sometimes and ineffective at other times. And the alternative is, of course, CASB. So I would be living in the EDR, SIM / log analysis CASB land. And on the process side, I would do some stuff myself, and some stuff would go to an outsourcing partner, an MDR of some sort, or an MSSP. choosing that is a separate story altogether. And we decide not to say curse words here, so we should leave this topic to another day.
How would you look at and bring in tools for automation as part of that as well? Because that's always another hot topic in terms of security operations is, can we have less people? What should we automate? How do we decide what to automate and all that kind of stuff? How do you look at that as a role in the SOC?
So I sort of responded to your question, focusing on mostly visibility and detection tools, but you're exactly right. The other half of my detection practice would be some kind of a orchestration automation platform, or SOAR. That's again another Gartner acronym that we are stuck with, but at least it's a cool sounding one. So let me very briefly go on a quick detour about why some people don't succeed with SOAR. The challenge that I've encountered sometimes is that you are buying SOAR to automate, to boost the effectiveness, occasionally, if your thinking is really wrong, to remove people from the operation or reduce them. The point is that sometimes what I've observed is that to get SOAR up and running effectively, you need to hire too many people with SOAR skills that you didn't have before. And you almost like have to staff up to automate. And if your boss's boss thinks, I'm going to automate, so I would need fewer people, and then you give him a rec that says, I need 2 SOAR engineers. And they're like, wait a second, what are you talking about? How can it be? So to me, I've seen this go kind of an unravel but it's the truth. You do need some initial investment in automation so that automation works for you, whether you are thinking as a force multiplier or to increase efficiency, whatever the point. You still have some kind of initial hump to make the system integrate with what you have, to build the playbooks, to adjust it to your processes, adjust your processes to fit the SOAR sometimes. So to me, yes, in a modern operation, I will have some kind of a SOAR platform for workflow, for gathering data, for enrichment, sometimes for automated action. But I wouldn't think that it's magic, and I wouldn't think that it's going to be effective out of the box. There will be a ramp up, and there will be skills challenges. There will be things I may need to code in Python or at least configure on the system. And that to me is what you need to kind of clearly get, that to succeed with SOAR, there will be an initial effort and occasionally a sizable effort. And then you will reap some of the benefits from automation afterwards.
Is that, because you mentioned this being a dedicated role, you need people now to do automation. Do you think it's fair to assume that, in the next couple of years, we should start, by we, I mean, people hiring for a SOC, they should say like, hey, you want to be an analyst? Like you need to have some automation skills because everyone's going to be doing automation, or you think that's going to stay like a separate role?
So I wrote this another blog post which was focused on detection as code, which was like a long passion that was like not. The blog post was being written over the course of 3 years, which almost never happens for me, is because I wanted to have it be well researched. And you can look up the post, but the point is that the main criticism to that post was this: I don't want anything as code. I don't want to code. I want stuff to work. and admittedly, we can make jokes, we can make snide remarks that it's kind of short-sighted. The point is, it's still the truth for many organizations. They don't necessarily want something as code because they don't want to code. They don't have people with the proverbial Python or other skills. And so in that sense, we will have to live with the fact that automation would require configuring or programming things. I don't think there's a way around it. Of course, modern SOAR tools allow you to do some things without coding. You can visually configure playbooks. There are some pre-integrated systems. You will collect data. You will push some of the actions without doing any programming. But to be honest, and in my experience, you will have to dig under the covers pretty often. All this integration, my SOAR calls up my EDR, but it's version 4.7. They upgraded to version 4.8. My SOAR calls and EDR doesn't answer anymore because the API changed. You can wait for the vendor or vendors, in this case, to fix it, or you can also go and modify the Python code that calls up the API. It's going to be much faster if you can do it. And so the need to have that skill shows up. Or you have this hugely valuable playbook from a vendor, but 1/3 of it doesn't match your operational reality. So you do need to either beg the vendor for a new playbook, hire a consultant, an expensive consultant, or you need to learn Python and go under the cover and just like hack up this playbook to fit your operational realities. Again, you will need those skills. So Automation, for sure, but like who makes the thing work? It's not the gnomes under the mountain. It's humans with skills to change the content, to change the playbooks, to tune the tools. And again, these skills would be required.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things you have written about recently that I really liked the blog post for was threat detection coverage and trying to figure out, like, is everything actually going to work? And the challenge is related to doing so. What's your current thinking around that challenge and how SOCs should approach measuring and ensuring that that they do have coverage?
Again, this started in my Gartner days to an extent when we wrote a big paper together with Augusto Barros. We wrote a big paper focused on the use case management. If you have a SIM or other detection technology, you have use case, you have content, rules, detection models, whatever, depending on your tool. The point is that you have some kind of a life cycle where you say, I need to detect this threat, or there's a compliance pressure to monitor something, or I have a valuable asset, and then I have to build or modify or procure detection content, and then I'll have something on the output. The thing is that this type of use case thinking is the correct thinking for detection tech, but there's a layer over it that says, okay, but what should I want to detect? Like, what is it that I should want? And of course, the top tier elite organizations with solid threat intelligence, threat assessment missions, they do know their threats. They may not know all of the threat actors by name, but they do know what types of threats they need to watch for. So this question is kind of a dead obvious question for them, like, duh, we know what we need to detect. But if you go a little bit lower on this whole maturity pyramid, you'd have organizations that would not have a good knowledge about what to detect. So sometimes they would call me back in my analyst days and say, what correlation rules I should enable in my SIM? And I say, well, it depends on your threat assessment, like what sort of threats you are focused on. And they say, we don't know, you tell us. And I say, no, I'd rather not. I'd rather you target it to what you need. And they would say, we don't know what they need. What does everybody else want? And I would say, okay, so let's assume your threat model is kind of a flat threat model. It's the same threats as everybody else, average threats. Okay, I can give you an answer, but are you willing to live with that? And some people said, yeah, absolutely. Give us what the average person is deploying in their SIM. And I will hit them with the top 5 use cases, which is still somewhere in my Gartner blog. But other people say, actually, no, wait a second. We do need to somehow think about threats we need to detect. Now, how do we jump from this back to coverage? Imagine I have a SOC with SIM, EDR, other tools, and I'm detecting something. How do I know that something matches what I want to detect? Do I have gaps? Do I have stuff that I am not detecting? Do I have stuff that I think I'm detecting, but I'm not detecting because my log sources are broken? Do I have some rules that I'm misfiring? Do I have some, ML unicorn that doesn't, whatever unicorns do, it doesn't do that. So how do I test all that? How do I validate all that? How do I match what I know I want to detect and what I'm really detecting? This was the essence of a coverage blog post. It's kind of a bit of a mini framework. I guess I'm being generous, 6 questions about how to really think about whether you're detecting what you want to detect. Because to me, it's a useful question. Otherwise, you'd be detecting the average things or whatever your vendor tells you, and it's not the best use of your money, your tool budget, your people budget.
What other challenges do you think SOCs are facing right now? Kind of open-ended question. Is there any one thing that you're spending a lot of time kind of analyzing or thinking about in terms of what the next or current biggest challenge is going to be?
Yes, I have. My next kind of passion project related to SOC is connected to building a vision for a cloud-native SOC. Imagine that you are a cloud-native company and you are using all those modern, exciting services and you don't have a data center. In fact, you may have even limited use of infrastructure as a service. You're all cool 21st century stuff from containers to microservices to APIs to whatever, like I'm being a bit facetious here. But the point is that you don't have any of the legacy stuff. How does your SOC look like? Like, that's a head scratcher because many of the things you'd reach for wouldn't be there. And that led some really smart people to say that the SOC has no place in that future. And of course, if you say you practice SOC-less detection, as our esteemed colleagues from Netflix once said, I would say, no. You have a modern SOC. You're not being SOC-less. You are practicing the modern SOC processes and tools. But what those are, I want to kind of write this up and I'm doing some informal research to figure out how would SOC look like if you don't have any of the legacy stuff? And I am maybe, I don't know, 1/3 of the way there. So I don't have some of the answers, but I have some of the answers. And I had some people reach out to me with questions. And for some questions, I had no answers. I'm not really sure how to do that. I know that I'm learning from some people internally, how we do it. I'm learning from some people on the outside. But to me, this is a lot trickier than say, hey, just deploy the best EDR. But because you may not have any place to deploy it. You may have Chromebooks for clients. You may have all sorts of software as a service on the production application side. So a lot of the answers we are familiar with just would be an NA. But then what is the answer? So to me, this is my kind of passion project, and it would take me a while to get to some kind of coherent story, which I would validate with peers in the industry and then in some way share.
That's a really interesting project, and I can't wait to see what you come up with when you get that finished up. Yeah, I've had similar kind of conversations with some of my colleagues and friends recently. It's just kind of like, where is this going? Like, is there a SOC in the future? And I think I like the way you said it, like, yes, there's a SOC, but the SOC's going to be different. And that sounds a lot like how I answer the question when people are like, oh, we have automation. Do we need a tier 1 in the SOC? I'm like, well, yeah, but the job is probably going to change a little bit compared to what it was 10 years ago or something like that. And so, it's a trick of naming and all of that sort of thing. But, thinking about that, I was kind of trying to consider like, well, what is the SOC of the future also going to do? I ran into a quote in one of your blog posts that was something around, it was like through 2025, 99% of cloud security failures are going to be the customer's fault. And with that, I started thinking like, oh, well, maybe the SOC of the future is like more, DevSecOps, making sure we don't make mistakes in what we're actually deploying and like put stuff in a vulnerable state or something like that. Is that maybe a direction you think it's going or part of the role?
Let me get to that. I want to address one quick point about this whole kind of SOC or the comparative function for the future. So one thing that refers back to XDR conversation is I had a tweet somewhere which generated a lot of responses. I've seen a lot of vendors and a lot of people say, well, XDR is likely the future of SOC. And I'm like, if your IT is all microservices and SaaS, how would you do XDR if it's based on EDR, which requires a machine to install stuff onto? And, I've got some really fun responses, some angry ones. But the point is that it's a genuinely tricky question how some of the stuff would evolve in the cloud. Now, back to your question, the 99% quote is like a classic Gartner quote that's been repeated over the last maybe 7 years with different variations. But the essence of that quote was that cloud providers are becoming more and more secure. And as a result, cloud customers is who ends up kind of holding the bag in case of a breach. The blog where you picked the quote is kind of connected to some kind of me thinking aloud about how we can change that, because I kind of feel bad blaming the cloud user, and there are reasons why I feel bad about it. But I also realize that the blame is placed kind of correctly, because if you copy your insecure application that was deep in the data center and you drop it straight in the cloud with public access, and your MySQL password is MySQL, and MySQL is exposed to the internet, your host, but you can't blame the cloud provider, whether it's going to be, Google, Amazon, or Azure, like it's not their fault. It is your fault. But what if, refer back to our original discussion, if you're just following your playbook from on-prem, and you just lift and shift the application, an application is used to being behind many firewalls deep in the data center, and now it's in public cloud, bad things happen. Now, if you make this route difficult and say, I'm going to be the cloud provider that is very opinionated, and if you dare bring up your MySQL with password MySQL straight to public access, I'm going to ban you. That also sounds bad, because sure, you can help. You're not really helping the client to practice secure computing, right? You are preventing computing. You're kind of preventing IT. So they would go probably to somewhere where this isn't a constraint. So how do you make this kind of secure, easy, and the fault would not lie with the customer? This is a really hard one. It's a bit of a head scratcher. And in that blog post called "Is Your Fate in the Cloud?", I kind of outlined the vision that people at Google have built for trying to solve that conundrum. How do we, keep cloud secure, keep cloud customers secure, and essentially, not blame them for breaches, so not blame them for mistakes, but build an environment where mistakes are less likely And if they still happen, then we kind of backstop with insurance. That was a part of our approach to this. So I sound like a marketing guy at this point because I'm describing Google's approach here. But to me, this is really the origin of that, is that this whole 99% of security problems in the cloud are customers' fault, which I still feel bad about, even though I know it's factually probably correct.
It seems true, right? Like we've seen S3 buckets, we see all this stuff like all the time, just very simple mistakes that, someone probably just didn't know better because it's a new-ish technology still relatively, right? Yep. One of the other things I wanted to ask about is, let's assume, we're 5, 10, 50 years in the future, however long it takes with the inertia thing, right? But companies kind of get it, right? They're cloud native, we got zero trust going on and all that sort of stuff, at least as we understand the best that can be done right now. If we had a company doing all those best practices and you were an attacker, how does that change the game for you? Like, how would you approach a company that has all of these new technologies? Where do you see what new attacks are going to show up as a result of all of this infrastructure change?
So this is a tough one because over the years, I've been kind of trying to stay away from predicting threats because ultimately security, we need to live as defenders. I do think of myself as a defender. As defenders, we have to live with whatever the attackers come up with. Like if we predict the threats and then go with that, but the reality would be different, we're kind of screwed, right? So to me, this is why I sort of like a little bit afraid of predicting the threats, because if you predict the threats, then you subscribe to your prediction as reality, and then you act as if it's real, and then something else happens and you're a host. So not a big fan of predicting threats. But what I do want to predict, or maybe do want to answer your question in a useful manner, is if everybody becomes cloud native, secure, effectively using cloud, using modern approaches to security and computing and IT, and what would the attackers do? That's a very optimistic vision to me, because I think it's going to be a long, long time before we get there. But I would say that there will be some things that make me nervous. I'm not sure I lose sleep over them, but at least I become somewhat concerned about them. Of course, I have a blog post where I kind of allude to them, but the post is about SOC, and people mostly responded to the SOC message, not to the possible threats. So, for example, you rely on threat hunting for some of the kind of leftover threats. You have good controls, you have solid preventative controls, you have solid detection controls, and if something passes through, you have the hunting team or hunting operation that would catch what went through your controls. That's good. Now, hunting, of course, works on human timeline. It may be minutes, hours, occasionally days. But what if your attacker is more automated than you are? Imagine that your attackers out-automated you. Imagine that they have certain things, think about I don't want to have upgraded worms, but more automated intrusion machinery, more automated exploit discovery. If their timeline is more condensed than your hunting timeline, then you sort of lose that weapon in your arsenal. You rely on automated tools, but if they're imperfect, then you're done. I'm a little afraid of that. I'm a little afraid of us relying on hunting for some of the top tier threats. And then if these top tier threats out-automate us, we won't have a weapon. Because frankly, if you say, oh, but I automate hunting, well, in this case, you're doing detection. Hunting is meant to cover faults in detection. So if you do automated hunting, you're detecting, and you need hunting to backstop that. But if the attackers out-automate us, I don't know. I don't have a good answer. Sorry, I really don't. And we can make all sorts of jokes about AI and ML. But to me, as I've mentioned in a few other times, the sane view of AI and ML for security is to be skeptical in the short term, but to be optimistic in the long term. You said 20 years. I don't know. 20 years sounds like a time where we would have a lot more and a lot deeper automation for both offensive side and defensive side. And if we would see more fast evolution of automation on the offensive side, defenders' life would be tricky. And I don't know how tricky, but tricky it would be.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe it's a good place to end it off with a final kind of general question. You may have kind of answered this already, but the balance between, attacker and defender as it is right now, going out into this future where both sides are going to get better at their jobs, do you see the balance staying about where it is now, or do you see maybe attackers or defenders getting better at their craft?
So this is a tough one, and I probably would leave you with some form of analyst style, it depends, or a softer answer. But let me try to kind of talk about it, and hopefully I wouldn't talk myself into a corner. So if we end up with a world where everybody is using modern OS, whether it's mobile OS, Android, iOS, or whether it's Chromebooks or whatever else, where the endpoint is a lot harder to attack. Your cloud is your server side, your data center side is all cloud, all microservices, all modern, all applications security tested. What would attackers do? So to me, it sounds like if this happens, then defenders will be better off. But I would never, as a security person, I'm never willing to bet against the attacker. Hopefully, this wouldn't be the only quote from me from this podcast, but as a defender, I'm never willing to bet against the attacker. So I almost assume that if we do adopt hardened OS, 100.0%, we're going to adopt zero trust style access, so no VPNs, no funny segmentation stuff, no, sorry, you're on an internal LAN, and your server side is more secure. Am I willing to predict that attackers are hosed? No, I'm not. I would never bet against the attacker. I'm not sure what they would do, but they would do something very impressive.
Yep.
And then we as defenders would have to adapt and play games, and our life would remain fun, and we'll get paid big bucks and all that.
Yep. I'm 100% with you on that one, right? Attackers are just as ingenious as any blue team member is, and I think it's going to be a game that plays out, and it's going to get harder and harder, and the bar is going to get raised, but then they just get different problems to solve, and ultimately the game continues is what I'm thinking is probably going to happen. All right, so where can we find your blogs and the articles and stuff that you've been mentioning throughout this interview? Because you've got a bunch of awesome stuff online. I want to make sure listeners get a chance to check it out.
So you have my Twitter handle here and in your ticker. Most of my writing today is on the Medium blog, which I really thought hard about naming in some cool way, and it's called Anton on Security. I could not come up with it. My old blog was called Security Warrior, and it was really cool, but I kind of felt like this is a little 2011. So I kind of abandoned this when I joined Gartner, and now I don't want to pick it up anymore. So it's Anton on Security on Medium. You have me on social media as per your ticker, and our new security podcast, Cloud Security Podcast, had to comply to Google naming convention, and that's why it's called Cloud Security Podcast. We could not have any cooler name approved, sorry.
Everyone knows exactly what it's about, though, so it's great.
Yeah, there's that. Yes, correct. So we are recording episodes mostly focused on cloud security, not only Google Cloud, but just like what people encounter. We're going to do a little series on this whole cloud migration challenges, how people shift their thinking to more cloud native or cloud focused. This is probably where to find me. It's usually Twitter, LinkedIn, Anton on Security blog, and now Cloud Security Podcast.
All right. Sounds great. Well, thank you. That about wraps it up for today. So this has been awesome. Really appreciate your time for the interview here. We'll stay in touch, maybe have you back, as things continue to evolve throughout the years here and we do more and more seasons. So thank you for giving us your view on the future here. And it'll be interesting to see where the blue team goes.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Hey, Blue Teamers. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Blueprint. If you've got a second and want to help support the podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It would be really, really meaningful to us. And if you have any ideas or suggestions, I would love to hear them. Your reviews are going to be one of the best ways to help others find this podcast. So anything you could do would be a big help. As always, thank you for listening. You can connect to me on social at SecHub, SECHUBB on Twitter or on LinkedIn. So until next time, thank you for listening to the Blueprint Podcast.